All right, everybody. I think at this point, most of the folks are in. If anyone else is going to join, they'll catch up with us when we get there. But again, if you just joined since I started the webinar, my name's Ryan Fragapane. I'm one of the product directors here at Ashto, and Ashto Wear Safety, powered by Numetric, is one of my responsibilities. So I think we have a great webinar today. We're going to try to keep it to an hour. Appreciate all your time and make sure we can get this done within the hour. Before I hand it over to the team that's going to handle the webinar, I just want to touch base on a few logistics things. So first of all, as you probably can tell, all of you are muted right now. The reason being is that we are recording the webinar. So you should have got this webinar is being recorded when you joined. So just so everyone knows, the webinar is in fact being recorded. It will be available probably tomorrow. We'll have it all cleaned up and edited, and we will post it on YouTube, link it to our website, and we will send that out to everybody who registered. So even if they didn't attend the webinar, they registered, they will get access to that video, and then you can forward that email or link to anyone else in your organization who you'd like to share it with. This is interactive though, so if you do have questions or comments, please feel free to type in the QA box. At the bottom, if you hover your cursor at the bottom of the screen, there should be a question and answer, a question box you can type into. You can type in anything you'd like. From there, we will try to answer it either in real time or we might save them to the end, time permitting, as we work through it. Should we not get to your question, don't worry about that. We are going to answer any questions we don't get to in writing, and we will email those out with the link to the webinar as well. So you'll have access to all of that in writing as well. So with that being said, I'd like to hand it over to Greg with Numetric to go ahead and get started. And we'll have some polls throughout this whole thing. So please take the polls. They'll be popping up periodically throughout the presentation. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. And thank you everyone for taking the time out of your day to meet with us today. We've got about an hour on the books for the webinar today, so we're excited to be here and be meeting with you all. Just a couple kind of additional housekeeping notes here. Just a reminder, I know it's a little late because it is next week, but we do have our User Experience Advisory Committee meeting that is coming up next week in Annapolis. So for those of you who are going to be joining us out there, we're excited for that. It's going to be a great meeting. This is where we get together with representatives and users from all of our partner agencies and talk about the future of the applications, how we can improve and share best practices with all of our users. So excited to be there and excited for everyone who's going to be joining us. We are in luck today. We've got a great webinar. We always have good webinars, but this is a really good one. I'm excited today to be talking a little bit with Derek Troyer about preparing for the upcoming Highway Safety Manual 2nd edition. As Ryan mentioned, here's kind of our high-level agenda for what we're going to run through today. Really quickly, we'll do introductions, and then I'll turn the time over to Derek. We will have time at the end for that Q&A. So just as Ryan mentioned, drop your questions in as you think of them as Derek's going through his presentation. Excuse me, and we'll keep an eye on that chat. We may be able to answer some of the chats in the actual pop out as Derek's going through the presentation, but we should have some time at the end for kind of a more open Q&A. So keep the questions coming in, and then we'll make sure that we get those all addressed at the end as well. Now, our presenter today, we are very fortunate to have Derek Troyer, who's going to be talking with us about the upcoming version of the Highway Safety Manual. Derek is the Director of Strategic Services here at Numetric. He's recently joined us here, so really excited to have Derek here and to have him share his presentation with us. So I think I'll let Derek finish the rest of his introduction because I would just screw it up. So we'll go ahead and kick it over to Derek now, and you can take it away. So thanks.
Good morning, good afternoon. I'm going to go short form, Greg, so I don't think you'd screw this up. So Derek Troyer at Numetric. I am the safety engineer over those strategic services. And we'll get to a couple slides later about what that actually is and looks like. But really trying to support states and agencies across the nation and with the software application, but just data analysis in general, right? So I'm going to end the poll, last call for a poll, and share the results. So luckily, there's 77% states here. It's an AASHTO webinar. Probably isn't a surprise. The second question really helps me understand as I'm presenting who my audience is. So thank you for answering that. I'm a little concerned about the almost 30% of you that's never heard of this or that you've heard of it and you don't really use it that often. I might go a little fast, so I apologize, but I'm really going to hit the high points of what's changed and what I feel is important. These are slides based off an AASHTO slide deck that Darren Torbeck's presented as well. But I've added in my flair and ideas and things. So anyways, welcome all. If you have questions, if you are in the latter half of the audience that uses this occasionally, feel free to ask as many questions as you have. Again, we probably won't, that happens, we won't get to all of them, but we'll do our best. All right. Get that gone and share my screen, and then we're off to the races. All right. Somebody confirm that you can see my screen just because that's me being scared. All right. Cool. So really, what is the Highway Safety Manual? And there's a lot of misconceptions about it, but it is only a guidance document. It's kind of the collection of the best ideas to help people manage their roadway system, their safe and perform safety management, as well as understanding safety implications and projects for the project development process. So there's it's sometimes held to a higher standard, but it's really just a collection of really good ideas. And as you see across the nation, people pick and choose from what they can actually implement, depending on where they are in their agency. So there's no standard, there's no wrong way. It is kind of the best place we are at this time. Well, we're just almost there for the second edition. I do want to kind of highlight that this thing has been around for several years. So it started in 1999 with and worked its way through Transportation Research Board, TRB, to really become the manual that was released in 2010. There was a supplement in 2014, and then right away, because that's the way research works, we started the second edition, and I've kind of been involved in the development of the second edition in some form or fashion since 2015. So all of my gray hair has come from this and maybe a few other things, but we'll talk about those later. So really just a quick look at what the existing chapter structure is. Overall, there's 4 parts. And then under each part, there's the different chapters. So part A is human factors and the fundamentals. Part B, the roadway safety management process. Part C is these predictive models. And then D is about crash modification factors. 2014, there was just a supplement of freeways and ramps. So don't really worry about that. But if we want to look at what the structure is for the second edition, it still has those 4 main buckets. Now I've highlighted in blue kind of the new chapters, and I will definitely discuss those as we go throughout this hour. But I will also pull in some other key concepts throughout the day. So it definitely was not a rewrite. It really is trying to incorporate new ideas. It also incorporated all the appendix material that was practitioner based into the actual chapters. So there's it's larger. Let's just be honest. It's about 1,600 pages, and I've pretty much read it twice. So that's how I fall asleep at night. So getting started, really with the part A, let's just go in order because otherwise it doesn't make a lot of sense. So this really sets the stage for how the HSM can be incorporated into the planning, design, operations, and maintenance activities. So kind of the holistic, here's kind of the way this works, here's how safety management works, and gives a lot of the background information. So it's probably the least referenced part of the first edition because you read it once and you're like, oh yeah, I'll talk about a few things, so it might have more life as we move into the second edition as well. But every part has this new introduction, which is really helpful. making slides, but really helpful in understanding how this part can actually influence the things you do at your work, right? So here's the purpose. It says, here's some applications of this chapter or this part, and then how it relates to the other parts and how it relates to the project development process. So there's 4 of these in there, kind of new to the 2nd edition. So really giving you an idea of what's in it in a nutshell. Like, I think don't hold me to this. They're all under 10 pages. Some are like 5. Um, but inside the part A is the human factors chapter. And so this one has really been expanded. It has all new principles, a lot that are generated from the human factors guide. And then there is another research report, NCHRP report 1111, and its title is insane, so I'm going to read it. Diagnostic Assessment and Countermeasure Selection, a toolbox for traffic safety practitioners. It really incorporates a lot of these human factors into the diagnosis and countermeasure selection components. So taking those best ideas from that past research and incorporating them into the new 2nd edition. Moving on. Change slides. There we go. We'll do this one. So moving on to the chapter 4. So I kind of glossed over the first 2, but this is kind of, there were no chapters specifically related to pedestrian or bicycles. So this is the first time focused on and trying to understand and better understand how you can incorporate pedestrian and bicycles into the roadway safety management process, as well as some of the predictive models, which we'll get to in part C. Overall, it outlines kind of what these contributing factors are in these different areas that you see on the screen. But it also added this crash typing for non-motorist pedestrian bicycles specifically on what they were doing at the time of the crash. So we get tons of crash reports. It's kind of our bread and butter of what we use at times to figure out what's going on. And that's really lacking. It's just like, not a collision with a motorist. Like, that's cool. Or a collision with a non-motorist. Like, thanks for helping. So this really helps identify, if you read through the report, how to categorize what some of the movements are, and those crash types can then lead to countermeasure selection, right? So if you have this kind of scenario that's repeated at a location, you should consider these countermeasures or treatments for inclusion. Now, some states are, like Massachusetts, are moving forward. They have a vulnerable road user box in the crash report, which I checked yesterday, includes some of this crash type, like what was the non-motorist doing before the crash, during the crash, and where did they end up? That kind of information is really important. So we'll see how that spreads. I know that started from legislation, I believe, according to Bonnie or Michelle. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. But I think that's one good way to see how we're making progress with these crash types overall. So get ready. We're in our first or second poll question. So I want to know, if your agency creates pedestrian crash types, how do you categorize them? So let's see here. All right. So overall, there's 10 individuals. We'll go individuals because I don't know how many are duplicates of agencies that are using the crash pedestrian bicycle crash analysis tool that Federal Highways has through a transportation center at UNC. Forget the official name. So manual review of crash reports, that's kind of more of what I was expecting. And then some of them are, you're just getting what the officer are saying, maybe a little blended with the second response, as well as kind of that, I know there's a pedestrian involved, like step 1. So at a minimum, you can find them, which is great. So that's the highlights of part A. Again, really trying to incorporate more human factors and these pedestrian and bicycle considerations into the roadway safety management, and giving them kind of the priority that they really do deserve in our industry as we're moving forward, trying to solve some of these serious injury crash problems. So moving forward, next comes part B. And so this really is the safety management process. So I'm just going to skip the tile slide and do an overview with the diagram. I do enjoy this diagram. We finally moved away from a circular flow for this one because it incorporates the systemic approach on the right-hand side. And yes, it gets messy when you try to incorporate a crash-based approach and the systemic safety approach. So they do overlap a lot, but there are two new chapters in Part B. One is the area-wide approach, and the other one is that systemic approach, which I'm hoping is not new for anyone. So for the area-wide planning approach, this kind of goes, the reason it was, I'll go back a slide. The reason it's really high up is because it can be used for either one of these methods, right? It's really for either a planning study, like big idea study, or very large developments that are going to impact traffic flows on the existing road network, but you don't know where people are going to come to or go from. And so they, in CHRP 1781, developed these models that predict crashes based on census tract, traffic analysis zones, or counties. And they do both vehicle, pedestrian, and bicycles. So you get really great information about your existing conditions, and then try to understand, okay, if I influx this type of user to this area, like if it's a mixed use development and you're already seeing some mode shift to either transit or bicycle and pedestrians, and you influx a development that supports that, maybe your mode shift changes, and all these things can be accounted for in your safety performance function. So there are these bigger areas. So it isn't as detailed as what we'll talk about in Part C, which is road specific. Like on this piece of road, I have this many crashes. I should have this many crashes. What can I do to reduce them? So really that bigger, I don't know where the roads are going to be yet, but we want to understand our safety performance. I think the other use for this could be in your performance measures. So if you have county-based ones, say, okay, how much of an investment do we need to make in our county to really drive down some of these crashes? So you can look at countermeasures and try to reduce some of those crashes, and then you have a cost associated with them. So trying to go kind of that level up, bigger picture with this area-wide planning model. I just want to touch on network screening because this is subtle and most people I think will miss it. That there were 13 performance measures in the network screening chapter. In the first edition, we removed two. That was kind of consensus of the panel and AASHTO Committee on Safety steering committees. But there was also this intention of grouping these. So the first 5 are really great at reporting. They're less reliable, so you want to, if possible, try to move towards the more reliable methods for network screening. And so they highlight them. All the 11 remaining ones are still defined, still included, still have a nice chart in the second edition that tells you what the limitations are, what to consider if you're using that measure in your performance, depending, even if you're still using it for network screening. Like, do something is what my mantra is. I'd rather you do something and work to advance the methods versus not doing anything and waiting until you have everything accurate. So the other thing in the network screening chapter that I'll note is there are actually safety performance functions added. So there are national network screening models available now. They're pretty easy to develop. So I don't know how beneficial it is, but it does give you and gives the chapter some weight with an example problem as well. Now I'm just going to touch on systemic safety management. I hope everybody knows what this is. It's near and dear to my heart. It's one of the best data analysis tools we have that is proactive when you're looking at crash data. So how this works is you identify a target crash type, usually from some state strategic highway safety plan. I've seen others in the local road safety plan area, comprehensive safety plan area. These are like like priorities for the communities. And then you go in and you find where those crashes are occurring, what the facilities look like, and you pull out contributing factors, things that are in the area. They might not contribute to the crash, but they're all these locations with severe injury crashes have these similar factors, and they might not lead to the crash, but they're there. And then you screen your network regardless of crashes for those same contributing factors. And if you have 5 factors, you rank the ones that I have all 5 go to the top of the list, and you just kind of rank down from there. So you can complicate that. You can use predictive models with this, but at its basic level, it's trying to find locations where crashes have already happened and then do countermeasures where you haven't seen a crash yet. So there's no crash history. And that's really the benefit of the systemic analysis, because we know crashes are random in nature, especially our fatal and serious injuries, right? So, and Brooke helped me out with the UNC's Transportation Safety Center, or Transportation Center is called the Pedestrian and Bicycle Information Center, PBIC, right? So I think it's pbic.org if you go there. So thanks, Brooke. So moving on to part C, this I'll just go to the next slide. It's complicated. There's at least 100 new predictive models. I think in one meeting I asked how many more safety performance functions or crash prediction models are we going to stuff into this thing, like long term? Like, how sustainable is this? And we think we're reaching critical mass. There's definitely some cleanup activities, which I'll get to in a couple slides. But overall, the new ones that kind of have the most attention are roundabouts, luckily. It came out of NCHRP 1770. And then the one-way streets and 6 or more lanes on your urban and suburban arterials. I should have added a second bullet. Same study. I think it's 1762, or I think that's right, or 1758. One of those two include your one-way streets and 6-lane plus. But then it also took out all of the pedestrian and bicycle prediction models that were included either proportionally or the best we could incorporate them into the prediction models with motor vehicles, and they're now separate. So they're all pulled out and have their own prediction models and their own what they're called likelihood factors, because they're slightly different than a crash modification factor. And then overall expanded roadway characteristics to kind of help us in our project development process. And safety management is, if I change X, what would my outcome be? So trying to expand what characteristics we know influences crash outcomes and severity, right? So just to highlight a few, see this, I needed this slide on the last one. These are kind of the big projects that were used to as source material for the second edition of the Highway Safety Manual. So you can see them here. This will be posted so you can get them. Now, I will caution, do not go to the research and look for the coefficients that are included in the research. They've been modified as some of these are getting old. Most of the data used for all of these studies is about 10 years old or older. So they've been calibrated, and with actually 1772 did some of this work to bring them up to speed and make their site types a little bit more comparable. Maybe not the best way, but it is at least so you can compare. If you don't have your own models or calibration factor, you can use these studies. We did exclude a few of these research. There were just more questions that came out of the research than we were prepared to put into the official second edition. Not that this material isn't good or has good ideas and leads to decisions. It's just maybe needs a little bit more vetting. So one thing with the part-time shoulder use or HOV, HOT lanes is we actually prepared the second edition for those. So you'll see that freeway analysis now done directionally, where in HSM1, it was done bidirectionally. So if you had 4 lanes on one side and 5 lanes on the other, traditionally you'd analyze it both as a 4 or 8 and a 10 lane, and you average them back together and get the estimated performance, right? Well, now you just do one side and you do the other with the actual model, and you'll get your estimates. So those, more to come on those, and we need to just dig into them a little bit more. Overall, this is the general form of the crash prediction model. It hasn't really changed, except for that pedestrian and bicycles have been pulled out into their own little prediction model areas, and they get added to the motorist vehicle prediction models. So it starts out with the predicted average crash frequency. That's what your goal is, to understand the long-term performance of the average of average sites, right? So at my ADT, what would I anticipate the crash frequency to be at average sites for my community? And that's what the predicted value is. Historically, some people have used crash rates. These are nonlinear functions, which has been shown to be more reliable with estimating safety performance. But again, do the best you can with what you have. I would start to at least move towards some of these easier network screening safety performance functions if possible, which is number 2. And that's all you get for network screening is a safety performance function. And typically, some people complicate things, but on the norm, this is just that safety performance function. So that's the graph of the line. It's a pure function, typically of ADT, either total, entering, major and minor road approaches, and I'll show an example in a slide of what this looks like. Next up comes the adjustment factors, and you're like, well, this looks familiar, but these weren't called that in the first edition, and you are correct. So these are very specific crash modification factors that were developed in association with the safety performance function. So number 2 and number 3 were developed together. And so the thought process was, we need to call these something slightly different than a crash modification factor because they're special. And it also led to a lot of confusion as we're trying to implement some of these things. So they have been changed to adjustment factors, and they're still crash modification factors, but they're a very specific subset of them. Number 4 is your calibration factor. And this is a lot of your changes to your local conditions, crash reporting thresholds as well. And then finally, the new pedestrian bicycle crash prediction model. So we'll dive into each one of these with a slide or two just to kind of hit home. This is to scare everyone, which is fine. I panicked when I started to see some of these models. So this is in chapter 16 for urban and suburban arterials. These are the requirements of the crash prediction model for segments. And you can see there's 3 groups now, and HSM1, we only have 5 lanes or less. And now we're up to this, we have 6 or more and one-way arterials. And each one of those sets of site types or segment types require different elements to be collected and adjust that safety performance. Here's a scarier table. For intersections, same urban and suburban site types. And there's a lot of blue on this, right? So before we only had stop controlled and signalized for 3 and 4 leg. That's it. And now we have high speed, we have always stops. We have this thing called a turning T, which if I could draw, I would draw you a picture of it, but it's where the through movement turns. That's pretty much the easiest way. It's a little it's not intuitive always to drivers at who's stopping at some of these approaches. And then you get the roundabouts. Finally, yay! Heads up, I believe next week. Oh, I could get this wrong. Roundabout week is next week. That was this week. I was a week early, but I didn't forget. At least it's always better to be early than late. So next week is roundabout week. All things roundabout. And then finally, the calibration factor, as I mentioned before, really trying to adjust that the safety performance function and your adjustment factors up or down based on your local conditions and reporting. And why this is important is everybody has different weather patterns. Everybody has different lighting. It stays warmer longer in the south. So there's tends to be more pedestrian activity in the south for longer periods of the season. Just different driving populations, age. We know we're an aging population. So trying to account for a lot of these things as we encounter these safety performance functions. Also just updating it, right? So if the crash data is already 10 years old, what were you doing in 2015? It's not here. So lots of change in the past 10 years for these models. So just in general, it'd be great to get more current information incorporated in. So in general, can't look at questions because now I'm derailed. In general, I'm going to show two graphs. This is the first one, and I'll show another one later. They build off each other, but this is the typical, most general approach. So if everything's perfect, this is the way these work. And we know life isn't perfect, but in general, this is the intention of the models, right? So this is urban-suburban signalized intersection. The major ADT is across the bottom. The minor road ADT is 10% of the major, and you get a safety performance function. You get a curve. Yay! See, it's still kind of linear, but it's definitely not as like the crash rate if you start out at 0 would definitely be different as by the point you arrive at 15,000. So typically, if you're here for safety reasons, either public concern, network screening, something got you to the site to want to investigate it further, right? So most often your observed crashes will be above that safety performance function. That's just typically where it should fall if somebody's flagged it for more investigation. So really, you just take your ADT, and this is the first step of our crash prediction model. We're going to calculate our safety performance function and say we have about 8,000 vehicles on our major road, so 800-ish on our minor road, right? And so we would expect, so our observed is a little less than 6, and we'd expect a little over 1.5 as just using our safety performance function. Then we want to add in our adjustment factors and a crash modification factor. So let's just assume all the adjustment factors combined are 1/2. So, and our calibration factor is 1, just so I can make math easy. So where does this adjustment factor get applied? It gets applied to your predictive model. And so now this is your crash prediction model results, is the second lighter red dot down at the bottom. Right. So we'd anticipate, based on the site conditions, the long-term average, nothing else to consider at the site, the average of averages, you're a little under 1 for this location. So part C also includes a method to combine both the observed and the second predicted, so the lower predicted amount, into what's called the expected crash frequency. And it's using the empirical Bayes process that develops an over-dispersion parameter, and it kind of weights whether the long-term average of your specific site, your site, will be closer to observed or closer to predicted. So usually what happens is rural sites get weighted less towards the observed and more towards the predicted, and urban sites with a lot of driveways, maybe pedestrian, on-street parking, all those things lead to crashes, so there's more variability, and so that expected would typically be closer to your observed in the final outcome. So all of this is replicated for your pedestrian model and a bicycle crash prediction model. So 3 different sets of analysis to really understand the safety performance of your site. So the one nuance, these are developed through IRAP and USRAP programs, and then calibrated and customized to the US through a research report from 1784. And so there's these likelihood factors, the severity factors. So it has a lot of the similar things to the vehicle crash prediction models. The only thing it doesn't have is an over dispersion parameter. So you really can't weight your observed crashes with these prediction models. That's the main difference between the two. Otherwise, they all have a model. They all have a factors. These are called likelihood factors that you adjust that model up or down, and then trying to estimate the future performance of the site. So the other nuanced approach with pedestrian and bicycles is you do the left side, you do the right side. Anything mid-block, whether it's marked, not marked, whatever you call people crossing the road in the middle of a segment, you do that separately, and then intersections by leg. So there's all these analysis approaches, and you collect your adjustment factors. A lot of them will be duplicated, so it's not a ton of work, extra work to do the left side, right side, but it is a step that adds a step, right? And then bicycles are along the road, and then movements through an intersection. So luckily, the pedestrian models and the bicycle models have similar data attributes. So here are the, I guess this title should be likelihood factor, not adjustment factor, Derek. So these are the likelihood factors for pedestrians. And then if I go one more slide, these are the likelihood factors for bicyclists. And this is all, these are in 1784. So if you can't wait, and I went through the slides too fast, you can go see what these requirements are over there. But a lot of, if you're going to do a pedestrian analysis, it's not that much more data to do the bicycle analysis while you're there. So that's kind of my sales pitch for it. If you're going to do one, do both, period. We have seen some low predictions out of these, which I think calibrating them to your jurisdictions will help greatly improve the performance of a lot of these as well. So each of these, what's my next slide? Each of these are incorporated into chapter 14, 15, and 16, which are rural two-lane rural roads, two-lane, two-way. 15 is rural multi-lane, and 16 is the urban and suburban arterial. So these models are included in those and are only for specific intersection types, but I think they apply to pretty much all of the segment types that exist in there. So I'm going to take a breather and find my polls. So I think it's this one. 31. All right. So what elements are included in a crash prediction model to estimate vehicle-vehicle crashes? And I guess, Craig, are there any questions I need to, and I can answer right away?
Yeah, there's a couple questions that are going to be pretty quick to answer. So one question was, how do we differentiate Part C methods in the published HSM2? And how will they be different from the originally published NCHRP reports? So I guess what's the difference between the originally published NCHRP and the Part C methods in HSM2?
So I guess mainly the factors will be adjusted to make the models. So a lot of these models had their own individual research study and own data behind it. And so what 1772 and 1771A did was kind of make them comparable. And so those coefficients that are in the original studies will be different in the second edition. But the functional forms, I'm 95% sure all the functional forms will still be the same. It's really just the number value. It has been calibrated to kind of become nationally comparable across site types and locations.
Awesome. And then there's two questions from Tiffany, I think, that are going to be pretty quick to answer as well. So Tiffany asked, where do e-bikes, scooters, etc., fall in the separation between bike ped and vehicle?
This is complicated. I would say in the purest sense, they are not included. That would be my answer. E-bikes could be, depending on the population use, right? You could probably use bicycle model, but that would be a stretch for when these models were developed, I would think.
Okay.
And I'll just answer the other one. So the other one is, are there models for different vehicle types, particularly buses and motorcycles? There was a research study done recently in the last 5 years, because 5 years has been a blur, that really tried to look at vehicle size and do predictions based on large trucks. I don't think it included motorcycles, but I think there might be a research study on motorcycles because it's like 15% of our fatalities or more. And so my other hat, I'm the chair of the Safety Data Analysis and Performance Committee, ACD 12. Sorry, they changed things on me. It's complicated. And so one of our research proposals was to focus in on motorcycles and trying to get a better handle on them. So I think that's coming. So unless you think I should answer something else, I'm going to end this poll, share the results. So I think pretty much the magic wand, which it sometimes feels like that. Everybody got the majority of them right. Yep. So likelihood factors are those factors associated with the pedestrian and bicycle models. So that would not, they're not in the vehicle models, but they're pretty much used similarly to the adjustment factors that are in the vehicle models. So that one would be the one that and the magic wand are not in a vehicle crash prediction model. Cool. All right. A few more slides. Part D's quick. We threw a bomb at it. It became dated real quick. Let's just be honest. And so the panel and experts in the field kind of wanted to move towards maybe making it the longevity of it last. So we've removed all of the listing of crash modification factors, which I should define what a crash modification factor is. So a crash modification factor estimates the safety countermeasures ability to reduce crashes or crash severity, right? So it's used to be a crash reduction factor. You can see the relationship between a crash reduction factor. It's 1 minus a crash reduction factor is your crash modification factor. That just made the math easier, but it complicated everyone else's life. I love research. But so the listing of the CMFs in the highway safety manual have been removed. Again, that also cleans up kind of that confusion between what an adjustment factor is and what a crash modification factor is. And then the move towards these new chapters that were developed under 1763. And I say research projects like they're my kids. Like I have all these numbers in my head and sometimes I get them 1 off or 2 off, but they're in general in the right space. So I think it's 1763 is the research project for selecting and applying crash modification factors. And that is really the source material for chapters 19 and 20. So everybody knows where to get crash modification factors, right? If you want the latest and greatest, you go to the CMF clearinghouse, you type, you get 30 responses, and then you have to sift through all those responses. Now there is a star rating system that helps you get closer on your own, like fairly quickly, but you do want to dive into some of the details and the methods behind those crash modification factors to know if it's still applicable to your site. I remember like the Ohio example, I think it was a study done in Florida on seniors at nighttime and the lighting conditions. I'm like, well, the value looks amazing, but it really wasn't applicable to a university area and probably shouldn't be transferred to the different site types. So understanding the research study and its parameters are key into selecting a good crash modification factor, which if I go back a screen, which is why selecting CMFs is chapter 19, and then applying them and the different methods of application is chapter 20. So real quickly, I'm going to add to our complicated safety performance function and crash prediction model. So remember, this is the purest view of if everything is ideal, this should work. So, so we have our observed crashes, right? And we're in the CMF world, right? We've already done all of our predictions and all those things, but we have a crash modification factor of 0.5 now. So if we take that 0.5 crash modification factor and apply it to our observed, we're going to see almost a 3 crash reduction per year at this intersection, right? Now, conversely, if we look at what we predicted, the averages of averages, right? And we've even reduced that from our safety performance function down to a predicted value with our adjustment factors and our calibration factor. Now we're going to take half of that. So now it's the pink. Like I was running out of colors. So it's this little like less than a half, right? Amount of crashes per year that you'd be reducing. And sometimes this is the value recommended to be used in the second edition, depending if you're changing site types, what's going on between your different alternatives. So just be aware that between the observed and the predicted, there can be like, this is what your safety benefits and safety performance outcomes are based off of. Now, the ideal situation, if possible, is to use that expected value. So somewhere in between, right? And it has that over dispersion parameter, and you're weighting it between your observed and that predicted with adjustment factors. So somewhere in the middle. So about 2 maybe would be your safety or your crash reduction and lead to some safety benefits in between 3.5, right? So that's a more realistic of the long-term outcomes of what this countermeasure could do at this location. So that's really where CMFs come into play. They can be applied to all 3 of these in different situations and different scenarios. Ideally, it's expected, and I'll get to a reliability chart here in a minute. So I'm gonna skip this one just to save time. There may be time for questions, but we'll answer all your questions if you type in the chat pod or the Q&A pod, not chat, Q&A pod after the session. So really just want to touch on how AASHTO Aware Safety is preparing, really in support of our partners and users of both the tools and the Highway Safety Manual, which is coming out hopefully next year, early next year. I have been winning a bet for like 7 years, so it better be next year or somebody's going to be unhappy. So really the tools that have been put in place for AASHTO Aware are supporting the safety management process. So I wanted to highlight this. So really trying to actually do the left column. It's typically a crash-based method. If anybody is interested in trying to figure out how to use this with a systemic approach, I am very passionate about it and would love to dig into it a little bit more and get your thoughts. But really starting out with network screening, right? So we're making sure the application supports those advanced methods, the more reliable methods for network screening. So this, you can come in, you can do screens on intersections, segments, a sliding window at different lengths and their sliding window length is 1/10 of a mile, and try to prioritize your road network, right? The bread and butter, this is a network screening. We're going to figure out where our biggest priorities are. So then we can start doing some better site assessments. And what do you use next to do a site assessment is Crash Query. So this tool is, I like to say, choose your own adventure. I might be stealing that from Greg, but it is kind of the first level diagnosis tool inside AASHTO Aware Safety. It isn't curated at all. It's really a free-for-all. So you can highlight different crashes, different years, change your corridors based off hopefully your network screening, but even like customer inquiries, the public inquiries, right? We've all been there, but we've been trying to add more and more asset data and other tools. Like Idaho has schools added in, so you can kind of see these other features in the area of this crash data to really start diagnosing what's leading to the crashes at our site. Dashboards maybe is a little muddier in its connection, but I just want to highlight there's been lots of updates to it to add flexibility standards, a little 508 compliancy, all those things have been added to it. So these can be internal where you have to have that login, or be externally facing where nobody needs a login, everybody can have access to it, but it is really that curated journey through your site analysis. And then 2 tools that really do some of Part C and Part D of the Highway Safety Manual. So safety analysis really looks at crash modification factors, and it's been around the longest. So it has definitely been the more curated environment for our users, where you go in, it tells you your crash patterns, it recommends crash modification factors for you based on that crash patterns. On the crash patterns, you can select sub areas. So I want to look at these intersections and figure out what's going on and which countermeasures maybe are most applicable to that intersection. And then the other tool, which is more recently developed, is the alternative design tool. And this is really the staunch Part C analysis tool. So it has all these prediction models in it. It has all those crazy adjustment factor charts and graphs, like which ones do you need to fill out when? That is all being built into this tool called alternative design. There are lots, this is constantly being updated. Hopefully it sounds like wait, what month are we in? November, not next month, November. The HSM models will start to be released in the application, so you can start to see how things vary, and then try to determine which calibration factors, or start calibrating the new models, all those things, to make sure that results make sense and applicable to your site and your state, right? So just to differentiate the safety analysis and alternative design, I want to share this giant chart, which nobody can read in a session, but it's in the second edition. I love where we kind of ended up with this, but it boiled down into these three categories to increase your reliability. So, okay, we have crash data, and we're going to use CMF. So that's like of the advanced methods that we have, that's good. It's good to make, especially if you're doing like $100,000 project. Don't spend more on the analysis than the project itself. Just make a decision. So if you have a really low cost project, maybe just use observe crash data with a crash modification factor. And then you have your crash prediction models with safety performance functions. So kind of the red, the top one was the blue, the good. Observe crash data was blue in my charts. The better is the red, and the green is the best, right? And that's kind of how I've described them through those chart examples. So really to differentiate the last two tools, alternative design are the better and best models. Safety analysis only does the good. And then we're working to incorporate also that observed crash data with CMFs into alternative design, because you're always going to encounter, unfortunately, sites that do not have a crash prediction model. And so we just want to make sure that one tool can actually analyze your entire project and get you reliable results that you can then justify an investment of different countermeasures, right? So moving forward, we're really trying to still support our partners. That's our number one mission and goal, and saving lives in our roadway network, right? So continue to develop the tools to support the roadway safety management process. We are kind of going down this new road of methodology with the tools. We're starting to notice that it's not just, hey, here's a tool. It's, hey, what does this thing in this tool mean? Right. So trying to add training modules that can help users better understand what they're inputting in these applications, rather than just reading 1,600 pages in the highway safety manual. And then supporting states in calibration and safety performance function development. Again, these, even though they haven't been released, they're getting kind of stale in models. And so making sure that they're updated, at least with a calibration factor, will be important. And then as Greg showed, there's 21 states that are partnering with us. So we have a huge consortium of data, and I think this can start to be used to advance the science of safety across the nation or regionally, right? So can 2 or 3 states get together and do a research study together on maybe even calibration or safety performance functions, right? Just to put on my research hat, 4 things that I think you should keep an eye out if you're new or rarely use this. There is a practitioner's guide, is what I call it, the 1727 project. There are more crash prediction models coming out in 126, and then 130 is the official NCHRP training program for the second edition, and then 135 is kind of cool, the imagery reference illustrating the crash elements or the data elements in a crash prediction model. So all the adjustment factors, I think, I'm not on this panel, should be defined so you can actually understand how I measure it, what do I do with it, that kind of thing. So I have one final poll question, and I did just perfectly on time. Let me launch this bad boy. So, when you get your hands on the second edition, what new content will you read first? All right, great. I have 3 minutes. Are there any questions I can answer while this is up there?
Let's see. So we had a question. Let's see. Are there different adjustment factors for total crashes versus fatal and injury crashes, for instance? Or are those the same?
So I'm fairly certain all of the crash severity distributions, one of those two, have been updated, and the roundabouts have, and the pedestrian and bicycles have their own methods to estimate severity as well. I think the freeways still have their severity distribution functions, and that's similar to what's in the roundabout chapters as well. So there is a lot more focus on, if possible, to use some of those more advanced methods to come up with what the severity outcomes would be for these different sites. So they've definitely been updated. At a minimum, there's new proportional tables in there, based on the data that was used to calibrate the sites.
Awesome.
Cool.
I don't know if you have one you want to kind of cherry pick out of there. I've got another one I can read you here. You let me know.
So is there any discussion in the HSM2 on harmonization of crash data records across jurisdictions for safety analysis? So there is discussion about crash data in general and how reliable it is, and how there's regression to the mean and biases in all the crash reporting. I know some jurisdictions don't report property damage only crashes versus others who highly report it. So it depends, I think, within a state, because typically there's a few instances, but typically there's one state crash report. So it is at least the data being collected. But when you get thousands of data reporters entering data, you're always going to have issues with it, which is why combining the observed with a predicted and a calibrated prediction model really helps you understand the averages of averages, right? So this is the best estimate I can have long term, regardless of who reported the crash, where the crash happened. That's kind of the key to that one. So I think there's plenty of discussion in there. It's maybe, as long as I read the question correctly. So
Perfect. Well, I know we've got a bunch more questions that have come in the chat, but I know that we are at time, and we do want to be sensitive of that. Did you want to go through that poll?
I just think they're kind of spread out, which is awesome to me. There's a couple that kind of that go up, but in general, it's kind of across the board. So awesome.
That's good. Well, thank you, Derek. That was some great information. And we had a lot of engagement, a lot of great questions coming in as well. We will get these questions, we'll pull them out and make sure that we respond back to them when we follow up with the recording email. So again, keep your eyes peeled for that coming out in the next couple of days. We'll send the recording and then the answer to these questions as well. Thanks, Derek, for running through all of that information, and thanks everyone for taking an hour out of your day to meet with us. Ryan, was there anything on the AASHTO end that you wanted to include before we wrap up?
I think the only thing I'll mention is I dropped in the chat a link. If you didn't receive this invite to the webinar, or someone forwarded to you and you'd like to start receiving the invites to the webinar, there's a link there to our newsletter page on the right-hand side of the screen. There's an area where you can sign up to enter the mailing distribution list, and then you'll get all future webinars as well as newsletters that have some information in it as well as webinar information. So if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. But thank you for the time today, everyone. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.